The woman across from Garrett Mercer glanced at his wrist. A Casio watch, the kind sold at gas stations for $12. She tilted her head, smile tightening. "So what do you drive?" Garrett set down his water glass. "A pickup, 2011. She excused herself to the restroom. 5 minutes passed. 10. The waitress brought the check without being asked. Garrett paid, left a 40% tip, and walked to the parking lot where his rusted Ford sat under a streetlight. The engine coughed twice before catching. This was the 14th time. Garrett pulled into the underground garage of the Meridian Tower at 11:43, parked the pickup between a concrete pillar and a fire exit, and took the private elevator to the 18th floor. The penthouse opened onto a wall of glass overlooking the Savannah River, the marshlands beyond it silver under a half-moon, Italian marble floors, a Rothko print above the fireplace that was not a print, furniture selected by a designer whose hourly rate exceeded what most people earned in a day. The nanny had left a note on the kitchen island. Lily ate dinner, finished homework, asleep by 8:30, no issues. Garrett stood in the doorway of his daughter's room and watched her breathe. She slept with one arm flung over her head, the way Claire used to. Claire, 2.5 years since pancreatic cancer, took her in 11 weeks. 11 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. After the service, before the flowers on her grave had wilted, women began appearing. A former colleague who brought casseroles and lingered too long. His accountant's sister who happened to be at every charity event he attended, even one of Claire's nurses, the one who had held his hand in the hospital corridor and told him to be strong. They all knew the number. $43 million, the sale price of the logistics software company he had built from a borrowed laptop in a studio apartment 12 years ago. Not one of them saw Garrett. They saw the balance. So he built a system. The Patek Philippe went into a drawer. The Tesla stayed in the garage. He bought a Honda Civic with 147,000 miles for $3,000 cash and filled the trunk with clothes from Goodwill. He signed up for a matchmaking service under a profile that listed his occupation as boat mechanic and his income as $32,000 a year. And he designed a test. Every date ended the same way. The card declined. The wallet was empty. The man across the table had nothing to offer except himself. 14 women, 14 failures. Some left before the entrees arrived. One laughed. One said she suddenly remembered she had a boyfriend. The morning after the 14th, Garrett made scrambled eggs and toast while Lily sat at the kitchen island, working on a science project about tidal ecosystems. She glued dried seaweed to a poster board and narrated each step with the seriousness of a doctoral candidate. Garrett listened, pouring orange juice, asking questions he already knew the answers to because her voice when she explained things was the closest sound to peace he had left. "Daddy?" Lily looked up from her poster. "Are you sad?" Garrett's hand paused on the juice carton. "Why do you ask?" "Because you smile less than before." She said it simply, the way children deliver truths that adults spend years avoiding. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Marcus Tate, his brother-in-law and financial manager. Claire's older brother, the last living thread connecting Garrett to the woman he had buried. "Quarterly reports in," Marcus said. "Dividends came to $1.8 million. I need 3 signatures before Friday. Email them." A pause. "How was last night?" Silence. "Garrett, you're turning yourself into someone Claire wouldn't recognize." Garrett hung up. At 2:14 in the afternoon, a text arrived from the matchmaking service. Date 15 Friday evening, a diner called The Lantern on River Street. He typed, "Yes," without reading the details. The Lantern sat at the end of River Street, where the cobblestones gave way to cracked asphalt, a narrow building with a neon sign missing 2 letters and a screen door that slapped shut behind every customer. Inside, vinyl booths with duct-taped seats, the smell of pecan pie and bacon grease embedded in the walls, a counter with chrome stools that had not been chrome in decades. Garrett arrived at 7:15 and took the corner booth, his back to the wall. He scanned the room the way he always did, cataloging details, measuring the environment for his test. Then he noticed the waitress. She moved through the diner with an economy of motion that suggested years of practice, refilling coffees before cups went empty, clearing plates in single sweeps, remembering names. An elderly man at the counter reached for his water glass with a trembling hand and knocked it over. The waitress did not sigh. She did not glance at the clock or press her lips together. She smiled, and the smile was real, the kind that reached the eyes, and she wiped the counter clean while asking if he wanted a fresh glass or maybe some sweet tea instead. Her name tag read Nora. Garrett's date arrived at 7:22. A woman in a fitted dress and heels that clicked against the linoleum like a metronome. She sat across from him, ordered a sparkling water, and studied him with the precision of an appraiser. "So, what do you do?" "I fix boats for people." "Oh." She checked her phone. Asked about his car, about where he lived. 12 minutes. Then the inevitable. "I'm so sorry. Family emergency." She was gone before the waitress brought the pie menu. Garrett sat in the empty booth and did not feel anything. He was used to this. He called for the check. Nora brought it. She did not look toward the door the woman had just walked through. She did not offer sympathy or a knowing glance or a comment about people these days. She set the check on the table, refilled his coffee, and said, "You want to warm up on that, or are you headed out? I'll stay a bit." "Sure thing." 20 minutes later, during what appeared to be her break, Nora returned with 2 slices of pecan pie. She set one in front of Garrett, kept the other, and slid into the booth across from him without asking permission. She missed the best pecan pie in Georgia. Garrett looked at her. "That confident?" "I have regulars who drive 45 minutes. So yes." They talked. Not about jobs or money or where they lived. About the fog that rolled off the river at dawn. About the sound of tugboat horns at night, whether it was lonely or comforting. About the worst cup of coffee either of them had ever had. Nora laughed when Garrett described gas station coffee in West Texas, and the sound cut through something he had built very carefully inside himself. The check was $11. Garrett reached for his wallet, opened it, and let his face fall into the expression he had rehearsed 14 times. "I think I left my card at home. I'm sorry." Nora was already pulling 2 tens from her apron. Tip money, folded lengthwise, still warm from being pressed against her hip for a 6-hour shift. She laid them on the table. "Happens to me at least once a week. Don't worry about it." No hesitation. No flicker of judgment behind her eyes. No recalculation of his worth. She stood, tucked the apron strings tighter, and went back to work. Garrett walked to his car. He sat in the Honda Civic with the engine off and looked at his phone. The banking app showed a checking account balance of $43,241,872. Through the diner window, he could see Nora counting her remaining tips at the register. Her lips moved as she calculated, fingers sorting bills into small piles, and he knew with a certainty that made his stomach clench that she was figuring out whether she had enough left for her brother's medication this week. He looked at the $20 she had just spent on him. He had 14 test results stored in his memory. 14 small validations that people were exactly as shallow as he feared. The 15th result sat in his chest like a stone. For the first time, he did not feel triumphant. He felt sick. Garrett returned to the Lantern the next day. He ordered black coffee and sat in the corner booth for 2 hours. Nora served him without comment. He came back Monday, Wednesday. By his 4th visit, Nora stopped beside his table with the coffee pot and a look that was more amused than annoyed. "You keep ordering black coffee and sitting here for 2 hours. Either you really love our coffee or you're working up the courage to say something. Is it that obvious?" "Little bit." He refilled his mug even though it was still half full. "So what is it? I wanted to ask if you'd maybe want to get coffee sometime. Somewhere that's not here. Though I understand if your answer is no." Nora set the coffee pot on the table and studied him. The dark circles under her eyes had not improved since Friday. The Band-Aid on her thumb had been replaced with a fresh one in a different spot. "I work 70 hours a week between here and the grocery store on Habersham," she said carefully. "My brother needs me. I don't have time for dating. Just coffee. 30 minutes. You pick when and where." She bit her lip. "Thursday afternoon. There's a park 2 blocks east. Bring your own coffee, though. I'm off the clock." Thursday afternoon, Garrett sat on a park bench with 2 gas station coffees and no idea why his hands were unsteady. This was still the test. This was still controlled. Then Nora arrived in jeans and a sweater mended at both elbows, hair down for the first time, and the script in his head went blank. "Sorry I'm late," she said, slightly breathless. Ethan had physical therapy and it ran over. Ethan, my brother, 15. He's got a degenerative muscle condition, progressive. Some days he can hold a spoon. Some days I feed him. She said it the way she said everything, plainly, without fishing for sympathy, without the heavy sigh that invited probing questions, just a fact of her life, like the weather. Our parents died in a car accident 3 years ago. I'm all he's got. That must be hard, Garrett said quietly. It is what it is. She took a sip of coffee and grimaced. God, this is terrible. Why did I suggest bringing our own? Garrett laughed. He told her the version of himself he had rehearsed. Tech support, small apartment on the south side, a daughter named Lily, 8 years old. Then he told her something true, that his wife had died, that the grief still lived in his chest, like a second heartbeat, that Lily once asked if Mommy left because she did not love her anymore, and that the question kept him awake on nights when nothing else could. Nora was quiet for a moment. Loss doesn't have an expiration date. Don't let anyone tell you to move on like it's a decision you make. Garrett looked at her. In 2.5 years, no one, not Marcus, not the therapist he refused to see, not the 14 women who had sat across from him, had said anything that simple or that true. 30 minutes became 2 hours when Nora jumped up, checking her phone, cursing softly because her evening shift at the grocery store started in 20 minutes. Garrett felt something close to vertigo. Can I see you again? I can't afford dinners or movies, Nora said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Every dollar I make goes to Ethan's medical bills or keeping a roof over our heads. Then we do this. Parks. Bad coffee. Talking. I'm not exactly rolling in money either. Nora searched his face for something. He did not know what she was looking for, but whatever it was, she seemed to find it. Okay, Thursday. He watched her walk toward her second job of the day and told himself this was still a test. He almost believed it. 3 weeks passed. 6 meetings, each one a small betrayal Garrett chose not to think about. Parks. Walking trails, a free outdoor concert in Forsyth Park, where Nora fell asleep on his shoulder during the second song, and Garrett sat motionless for 45 minutes, afraid to breathe, thinking about what 70-hour weeks did to a body, and wondering when she had last slept through the night without an alarm or a phone call from Ethan's night nurse. Nora invited him to dinner on a Wednesday. Her apartment was a 2-bedroom on the second floor of a converted Victorian. The furniture a mixture of thrift store finds and things that had clearly belonged to her parents. The carpet was worn but clean. The kitchen smelled like garlic and tomato sauce. Ethan sat in his wheelchair at the small dining table, dark hair falling over sharp eyes that missed nothing. So you're the one my sister smiles at when she's texting. Nora turned the color of the sauce. Ethan, what? I'm being observant. That's what you keep telling me to do. Dinner was pasta with a sauce from their mother's handwritten recipe book. Garrett ate and realized it was the best meal he had had in 2 years. Not because of the food, but because of the laughter between courses, the way Ethan argued about whether Pluto deserved planet status, the way Nora watched the two of them from the kitchen doorway, drying a pot with a threadbare towel, smiling like she had forgotten she was tired. A week later, Lily met Nora for the first time at a street fair on Broughton Street. Garrett had resisted this for as long as he could, because introducing his daughter meant this was no longer something he could walk away from. Nora crouched to Lily's height and asked what her favorite planet was. Lily said Saturn because of the rings, and then explained the Roche limit for 8 uninterrupted minutes. Nora listened to every word. She did not check her phone. She did not redirect the conversation to something easier. When Lily finished, Nora said, "So the rings are basically a planet that got too close and lost." And Lily's face lit up the way it only did when someone truly understood. Lily took Nora's hand and pulled her toward a booth selling handmade jewelry. Ethan, wheeling alongside Garrett, said quietly, "You make my sister smile." "She doesn't smile enough, so thanks, I guess." Something in Garrett's chest broke completely, not the controlled fracture he could manage. A full, irreparable break. That night, Lily lay in her bed in the penthouse. The glow-in-the-dark stars her mother had stuck to the 14-foot ceiling casting faint green light across her face. "Daddy, Miss Nora is like Mommy." Garrett's throat closed. How? Not her voice. The way she listens. Garrett sat on the edge of his daughter's bed until her breathing deepened into sleep. Then he stood in his living room, surrounded by furniture worth more than Nora's annual income, art that cost more than her apartment, a view from the 18th floor that stretched to the horizon, and none of it meant anything. He thought about the $20 Nora had pulled from her apron, $20 that could have bought pain medication for Ethan. He had $43 million and had let her pay. Garrett decided to tell her. He decided on a Tuesday, rehearsing the words in the shower, in the car, in the elevator up to his penthouse. He would say it simply. I lied. I have money. I was testing you. Then Wednesday came and the words stalled behind his teeth. Then the following Monday, and the Monday after that, each time he opened his mouth, something stopped him, and it felt less like cowardice and more like terror. He was not afraid of her anger. He could survive anger. He was afraid of the silence after. The empty booth at the Lantern where no one sat across from him, the unanswered calls, the penthouse at midnight, with nothing but a Rothko and a river view, and the sound of his daughter asking where Nora went. Their 8th date was at a small Italian restaurant on Whitaker Street, the kind of place with candles and wine bottles and handwritten specials on a chalkboard. Garrett tried to pay. He had planned it, wallet ready, card in hand. But when the check came, the server smiled apologetically and said the bill had already been taken care of. Nora shrugged from across the table. I got a raise this week, 25 cents an hour, but still. Big money. She said it like a joke. Garrett heard the pride underneath. 25 cents an hour mattered when you counted every dollar. It meant $4.33 extra per week before taxes. It meant the difference between choosing between Ethan's medication and the electric bill and not having to choose. A few days later, over coffee at the diner, Nora told him how she had nearly cried in the walk-in freezer that morning. A customer had left a $50 tip, and it meant she could finally buy Ethan the science textbook he had been asking about for months. She described standing among the boxes of frozen vegetables with tears running down her face because $50 felt like a miracle. Garrett's hands tightened under the table until his knuckles ached. He could buy 1,000 textbooks without checking his balance. He could buy the bookstore. The weight of that knowledge sat on his chest like a physical object, heavy and sharp-edged, growing heavier with every story she told him about the small victories that defined her life. Then Victoria Hargrove walked into the Lantern. She entered the way she entered every room, as if the space had been waiting for her and was slightly disappointing now that she had arrived. Cashmere coat, red-soled heels, a perfume that announced her presence 3 seconds before she did. Claire's oldest friend. Chair of the Savannah Arts Foundation, a fixture at every gala, every benefit, every dinner party where the guest list served as a census of local wealth. Victoria had known Garrett for 9 years. She had stood beside Claire at the wedding, delivered a eulogy at the funeral, and considered herself the guardian of Claire's memory in the way that certain people claimed ownership of the dead. She spotted Garrett in his Goodwill jacket, sitting across from a waitress in a diner with duct-tape booths, and her face performed a complicated sequence of recognition, confusion, and something that looked like personal offense. After Nora left to refill the coffee station, Victoria slid into the booth. Claire would be heartbroken seeing you like this. Thrift store clothes, eating at a counter diner, playing house with the help. What game are you playing, Garrett? It's none of your business, Victoria. I was Claire's best friend. I owe her this much. She left, but at the door she turned and looked back at Nora, who was pouring coffee for the old man at the counter. The look was appraising, calculating, the look of someone deciding what to do with information. That night, Marcus called. His voice was careful, the way it got when he was delivering news he knew Garrett did not want to hear. Victoria knows about Nora. She called me asking questions. She won't leave this alone. You know her. I'll tell Nora tomorrow. Before Victoria does. A long pause. You've been saying that for 2 weeks, Garrett. Garrett planned the confession for Sunday afternoon. Their bench in the park, 2 bad coffees, the words he had rewritten in his head so many times they no longer sounded like language. He changed clothes 3 times that morning, standing in his walk-in closet surrounded by suits worth more than Nora's monthly rent, finally pulling the Goodwill jacket back on because it was what she knew. It felt like a costume now, like something an actor wore in a play that had run too long. He left the penthouse at 1:30, and sat in the parking lot near the park for 20 minutes, engine running, hands on the steering wheel, trying to breathe through the tightness in his chest. He arrived at the bench 15 minutes late. Nora was already there. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, and something about her posture stopped him 6 feet away. She was composed in a way he had never seen before. Not calm, controlled, the kind of stillness that came after something had already broken, when the breaking was done, and all that remained was deciding what to do with the pieces. "I need to tell you something," Garrett said, sitting down beside her. $43 million. The words came from Nora, not from him. Garrett stopped breathing. Penthouse, on the 18th floor. Silence. 14 women before me. He felt the ground shift beneath the bench. Everything he had planned to say, in the careful speech, the rehearsed explanations, evaporated. "Who told you?" "It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is you didn't." Victoria had come to the diner that morning, 2 hours before Nora's shift ended. She brought an iPad loaded with a Forbes profile from 3 years ago, photographs of the penthouse taken from a real estate listing, a summary of Garrett's net worth and company valuation, and the satisfied expression of someone delivering justice she had been saving for weeks. She told Nora everything: the matchmaking service, the deliberate wardrobe purchased at thrift stores, the Honda Civic bought specifically as a prop, the card-declining test performed on 14 women before her. "Your experiment number 15, Victoria had said, watching Nora's face the way a scientist watches a specimen, waiting for the reaction that would confirm her hypothesis. Nora had not given her the satisfaction. No tears, no gasping, no hand pressed to the mouth in shock, just a quiet "thank you for telling me" and a steady turn back to the coffee station. Victoria had stood in the diner for another full minute, robbed of the scene she had orchestrated, then left without ordering anything. But now, sitting across from Garrett on the bench where they had shared terrible coffee and the truest conversations either of them had had in years, Nora spoke in a voice so steady it was worse than shouting. "I don't care if you have 43 million or $43. I care that you sat in my kitchen and ate pasta my mother taught me to make. You listened to me talk about sleeping in my car for 6 months to save enough to open the diner. And you knew you'd never have to do anything like that. You knew, and you let me tell you anyway." Her voice did not waver. "You let me pay for your dinner with tip money I needed for Ethan's medication. You watched me count quarters to see if I could afford gas, and the whole time you had $43 million in the bank." She paused. The river moved behind them, indifferent. "You were a tourist in my life." Garrett had no defense. Every word was true, and there was nothing he could say that would not make it worse. Nora stood. "I need to go." She walked away without looking back. Her steps were even and measured, the walk of someone holding themselves together through force of will. Garrett sat on the bench for a long time. The coffee grew cold. Shadows lengthened across the grass. A tugboat horn sounded on the river, and for the first time it sounded lonely. 7 days. Garrett called 14 times. Nora did not answer. The number was not lost on him. 14 calls for 14 tests. She was letting him taste the silence he had served to 15 women, the quiet rejection, the unanswered question of whether he was worth staying for. He texted twice. Simple messages. "I'm sorry." And then, 3 days later, "I understand if you never want to see me again, but I need you to know the feelings were real." The messages showed as delivered. No response. He drove to the diner on the 3rd day. A woman he did not recognize stood behind the register. Same apron, different posture. Not Nora. "Is Nora working today?" The woman looked at him with an expression that suggested she knew exactly who he was and had already formed an opinion. She called in sick. First time in 3 years. "Is she okay?" "First time in 3 years. What do you think?" He left. At home, Lily asked the question he had been dreading. She was sitting at the kitchen island doing math homework, her pencil pausing mid-problem. "Where's Miss Nora? Is she coming this weekend?" "I don't think so, sweetheart." "Why not? Did you have a fight?" "Something like that." "Did you apologize?" Garrett looked at his 8-year-old daughter, who understood relationships with a clarity that shamed him. "I tried. Try harder, Daddy. That's what you always tell me." She returned to her math problem as if the solution were obvious, which, coming from her, it probably was. Marcus came to the penthouse on the fourth day. He did not call first. He used his spare key and walked into the living room, where Claire's absence still hung in the air like a frequency only family could hear. He stood by the window, looking out at the same view Garrett saw every night, the river, the marshlands, the city lights, and he did not soften what he had come to say. I've watched you do this for 2.5 years. The costumes, the tests, the dates you designed to fail. I kept quiet because I thought you were grieving, and I owed my sister's husband that patience. But this is not grief anymore, Garrett. This is cruelty wearing grief's clothes. Garrett did not answer. You took your pain and turned it into a weapon, and you used it on 15 women. 15 people who didn't owe you anything for what happened with Claire. Claire would be ashamed. I'm ashamed. Garrett sat on the couch and stared at the floor. There was no argument to make. Marcus was right, and the rightness of it was the worst part. On the 5th evening, Garrett drove to the Lantern at closing time. He parked the Honda Civic across the street and waited. The neon sign flickered off at 10. The last customer left at 10:08. Nora came through the front door at 10:12, keys in hand, apron folded over her arm, her hair falling loose from the bun she wore during shifts. She saw him leaning against the car and stopped. She did not tell him to leave. She did not walk the other direction. She stood 10 feet away, arms crossed over her chest, chin slightly lifted, and waited. Garrett spoke. His voice cracked on the second word, and he did not try to fix it. You were right. I was a tourist. I wore Goodwill clothes like a costume and drove a broken car like a prop. I turned my grief into an excuse to test everyone I met, and I used it on the only person who didn't deserve to be tested. He took a breath that shuddered on the way in. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just need you to know that everything I lied about, the job, the car, the wallet, none of what I felt was a lie. Lily asks me every night where Miss Nora is, and I don't have an answer. That's the only truth I've got. Nora was quiet for a long time. A car passed on River Street, headlights sweeping across the diner's facade. The river made its slow, patient sound against the pilings. I need time, she said finally. Not days, not a week. Real time. She turned, unlocked the diner door, and went inside. The lock clicked behind her. Garrett stood on the sidewalk for another minute, listening to the river, then drove home. 3 weeks of silence. Garrett did not call, did not text, did not drive past the Lantern. He honored the distance Nora had asked for, and the honoring was its own kind of pain, deliberate and daily, the opposite of the tests he had spent 2.5 years designing. Those tests had been about control. This was about surrender. He went to Marcus on a Tuesday morning with a request that surprised them both. They sat in Marcus's office in a modest room above a tax preparation firm on Bull Street, and Garrett said, I want to use the money the right way. Not to buy forgiveness, not to prove anything to Nora, because it's the right thing to do, and I should have been doing it all along. Together, they established a community health fund for families in Savannah caring for someone with a chronic illness. The fund covered medical equipment, physical therapy copays, prescription costs, the things that insurance did not touch, and that bankrupted people quietly without anyone noticing. The fund carried no name, no plaque, no press release, no gala. Anonymous in the way Garrett should have been anonymous all along, not as a disguise but as a principle. He sold the Honda Civic to a college student for $1,500, packed the Goodwill clothes into black trash bags, and drove them back to the same store he had bought them from, carrying them inside and setting them on the donation counter without explanation. For the first time in 2.5 years, he wore his own shirts, drove his own car, and walked into rooms as himself. The therapist Marcus had been suggesting since Claire's funeral had an office on Drayton Street, 3rd floor, a window that looked out onto a live oak draped in Spanish moss. Her name was Dr. Chen, and she asked questions Garrett did not want to answer, about Claire, about the tests, about what he was actually afraid of, underneath the system and the costume and the declining cards. The answers, when they came, did not make him feel better. They made him feel real, which was harder. Victoria called on a Tuesday evening, her voice carrying the particular satisfaction of someone who believed they had been proven right. I hear the waitress isn't returning your calls anymore. I told you, Garrett. She's not your kind of people. Garrett held the phone and felt nothing toward Victoria except a tired clarity. You told Nora because you thought you were protecting Claire's memory. But Claire would never have hurt someone the way you did. She would have been ashamed of both of us. Don't call me again. He hung up before she could respond. On a Saturday afternoon in the third week, Garrett stood in his kitchen with Lily and made pecan pie. Nora had taught him the recipe one evening after the diner closed, standing beside him at the steel counter, guiding his hands through the dough. Pecans roasted first, 10 minutes at 350, a splash of bourbon in the filling, because her mother believed it brought out the warmth. Lily helped stir the batter, flour dusting her nose, her tongue poking out in concentration. She had Garrett's jaw and Claire's eyes, and watching her hands work the wooden spoon made something ache in a way that felt, for the first time, like healing rather than breaking. The pie came out of the oven with the edges slightly burned and the filling not quite set. Lily tasted a corner piece and considered it with the seriousness of a restaurant critic. It's not like Miss Nora's, but it's still good. Garrett placed the pie in a brown paper box, drove to the Lantern at 9:45, and left it by the back door. No note. No knock, just the pie. Inside, 20 minutes later, Nora opened the back door to take out the trash and found the box on the concrete step. She opened it. The filling had not set. The edges were burned. She stood alone in the kitchen, holding the box, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and did not move for a long time. The bell above the boat shop door rang on a Thursday morning in the fourth week. Garrett looked up from the hull of a 17-foot skiff he was sanding, and saw Nora standing in the doorway. She wore jeans and a diner t-shirt, and an expression he could not read. She had never been here before. She had never seen this part of his life, the part that was not performance or disguise, and the part where he worked with his hands because he liked the feel of wood grain under sandpaper, and the smell of marine varnish, and the simple, honest satisfaction of fixing something broken. The shop was small. 2 bays, a workbench cluttered with tools, a radio tuned to a station that played jazz nobody requested. Sawdust covered every surface. It was the one place in Garrett's life that had never been a lie. Nora walked to the workbench and set down a white envelope. She did not sit, did not smile. Inside were $11, a 10 and a 1, smooth flat, exact change. You owe me, she said. Remember? You said you'd pay me back. Garrett stared at the envelope, then at her. Then he laughed. A real laugh, uncontrolled and raw, the kind that started somewhere deep in the chest and broke open on its way out, messy and unguarded, and nothing like the measured chuckle he had practiced for 2.5 years of performing normalcy. Nora tried to maintain her serious expression. The corner of her mouth betrayed her. Then both corners. She pressed her lips together, but it was too late. They stood in the boat shop surrounded by sawdust and half-finished hulls and the smell of varnish. And they talked. For the first time there was no mask between them. No costume, no script. Garrett told her about Dr. Chen, the therapist, about the community health fund he and Marcus had set up, about selling the Civic and donating the Goodwill clothes and the strange, disorienting feeling of being himself for the first time since Claire died. Nora listened, arms folded, leaning against the workbench. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she said, I was angry at you for 3 weeks, angry enough to consider never speaking to you again. Then I ate that pie you left at my door. Garrett waited. The filling didn't set. The edges were burned. It was genuinely the worst pie I've ever had. And I've eaten gas station pie. She paused. The shop was quiet except for the jazz radio. But you listened when I taught you. You remembered the pecans go in the oven first. You remembered my mother liked bourbon in the filling. You remembered the temperature and the timing. She unfolded her arms. That part wasn't a test. You can't fake remembering how someone's mother made pie. Silence settled between them, but it was a different kind of silence than the one that had filled the previous weeks. This one had room in it. Space to breathe. I haven't finished forgiving you, Nora said. That might take a long time. Might take longer than either of us is comfortable with. But I'm willing to try. If you're willing to show me the real person, not the dress-up version, not the penthouse version, the actual one. The actual one fixes boats, Garrett said quietly, makes terrible pie, and is afraid of losing you. Nora looked around the shop, the oil-stained floor, the tools hung on pegboard, the skiff with its hull half-sanded, raw wood exposed beneath old paint. This is real? This is real. Nora pulled a stool from under the bench and sat down. Then show me how you fix that boat. Garrett picked up the sanding block. Nora watched. Neither of them spoke for 20 minutes, and the silence felt the way it used to feel. On the park bench, on the riverfront, during the walks and the bad coffee, and the free concerts. The same, but without the wall. 2 months later. The Lantern, Friday evening. Garrett pushed through the screen door at 7:30. He wore a plain button-down, no label worth mentioning, and the Casio watch he had never gotten around to replacing. Not because it was part of the act. Because he had worn it so long it felt like his. He had driven the Tesla, which still looked wrong in the Lantern's gravel lot. A spaceship parked outside a lighthouse. Nora glanced up from the counter and shook her head, smiling. You're still wearing that watch. I like it. It keeps better time than the Patek. He slid into the corner booth. His booth, the vinyl seat, had a crack that fit exactly against his left knee, and he had stopped noticing it months ago. Nora brought 2 slices of pecan pie and 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him. Her shift was over. The last customers were settling their checks. The diner hummed with the quiet sounds of closing, the clatter of dishes being stacked, the soft hiss of the grill being cleaned. Her phone buzzed on the table. She answered, and Ethan's voice came through on speaker, bright and mock-serious. Hey, Garrett promised to bring pizza. Don't let him forget. Nora slid the phone across the table. Tell him yourself. Garrett picked it up. Pepperoni? Obviously. No pineapple. That's my last remaining boundary. Garrett laughed, the easy laugh of someone who had been part of this family long enough to know the running jokes. He hung up and set the phone down as the front door swung open. Lily burst through it, backpack bouncing, hair half escaped from its ponytail. Marcus 2 steps behind her, looking like a man who had spent 30 minutes trying to keep up with an 8-year-old. Lily ran straight to Nora and wrapped her arms around her waist. Not the tentative hug of a first meeting. The automatic embrace of someone who had done this 100 times. Nora held her, chin resting on the top of Lily's head, and closed her eyes for just a moment. Marcus caught Garrett's gaze across the diner. He nodded once. A small nod, barely perceptible, carrying the weight of everything unsaid. Claire would understand. Lily climbed into the booth next to Nora and pulled a crayon from her backpack. She began drawing on the paper placemat, tongue poking out. Miss Nora, I'm drawing your diner. But I changed the name, see? The Lantern, best pie in Georgia. Nora laughed and pulled her closer. Marcus said his goodbyes and left. The diner emptied. The neon sign buzzed in the window, and then it was 3 of them. Garrett, Nora, Lily. Nora looked at Garrett across the table. No more tests? No more tests. She pushed the pie plate toward him. He ate. The filling was perfect. The crust golden. The pecans roasted exactly right. Nora's pie was always perfect. Lily yawned and leaned against Nora's side. Nora stroked her hair without thinking, the way you touch someone who belongs to you, who you belong to. Garrett watched them, the waitress he had tested and the daughter he had been trying to protect in all the wrong ways, and he understood that he had spent 2.5 years searching for proof that the world could not be trusted, proof that people left, proof that love was a transaction with a price tag and an expiration date. The proof to the contrary had been here the whole time. In a booth by the window, under a neon sign missing 2 letters. In a diner that smelled like pecan pie and old coffee and something he had almost forgotten the name of. The man who tested 15 women finally understood that love was not a test anyone passed. Love was someone choosing to stay, not because they met your conditions, but because they saw you, all of you. The lies and the fear and the burnt pie and the $43 million and the Casio watch, and they chose to stay anyway, even after you asked the wrong question from the very beginning.